We're now going to continue along the pilgrimage roads and visit Saint-Foy in Conques and Saint-Pierre in Moissac. Both of these are in France. And here you see the monastery of Saint-Foy at Conques, sort of nestled into the hillside. It rests in a little hollow in the hillside, and that is where the name Conques comes from. It sounds a lot like our word conch for a conch shell. And so this is a little shell-shaped hollow in the landscape. And the word conque, of course, is the Latin, and the French is conch, is the conch. The town of Conques is on the pilgrimage road between Le Puy and Moissac. And you see that there are, of course, the 4 pilgrimage roads going through France, going through 2 passes in the Pyrenees, and then meeting up and becoming one road in Spain leading to Santiago. Saint-Foy has that typical pilgrimage road architecture that we saw at Santiago and at Toulouse. But it's smaller. And as you can see, the plan is a cruciform plan with a nave and transepts. And let's do a little comparison. Here we have the plans of Toulouse and of Santiago, and the plan of Conques. I have not tried to make them to scale. As you can see, I wanted to fit them on the PowerPoint, and so Conques is large, the other 2 are small. But in reality, Conques is a smaller church than Toulouse or Santiago. And it has a similar plan, however. We said it's cruciform, a Latin cross plan. And it has transepts, crossing, and like at Santiago, you can see that the aisles go up and into the transept, and then they also go around the apse, forming an ambulatory, or if you think about ambling, a way to walk around the ambulatory, and that there are radiating chapels, but there are fewer chapels. Santiago and at Toulouse, you have 5 radiating chapels from the ambulatory, and then the 4 chapels on the transept. At Conques, that's reduced. There's 3 radiating chapels radiating from the ambulatory, and 2, one on either side of the transept. And also you can see that there are fewer bays or sections. And you can look at the plan and you see those parallel lines going across the nave, and that of course represents the transverse arches. And so you can sit there and count the bays if you want to, but there are fewer than at Conques. And of course Toulouse had double side aisles through the nave. Neither Santiago nor Conques has that. When you look at the interior, they look virtually identical. You have a transverse arches going across the tunnel vault, rising up from the ground is the vertical colonnette or shaft. So you have this column that's attached to the wall, and it rises up to the springing of the vault, and then the transverse arch goes across the tunnel vault. Pretty much the same whether you're looking at Santiago or Toulouse or Conques. The nave elevation is 2 stories. You've got the arcade level on the ground, the arches, and then that 2nd story, the gallery, with the arches on the 2nd level. But there's no clerestory. We often talk about this as though it's typical pilgrimage road architecture. It's what you find at Santiago and Toulouse, and here again at Conques. And here you see it at Santiago. Vertical colonnettes rising, crossing, the transverse arches cross over the tunnel vault. And then you have this 2-story elevation with the arcade and the gallery and no clerestory. So, pretty much the same, except for the size and the scale. And here you see the diagram that shows how you have the side aisles, with the lower side aisles, which is a groin vault, You can't see that on the diagram. And then you have the gallery level, and no clerestory, no window level. And here's just details of the gallery looking up. And at Saint-Foy, they also have an octagonal dome at the crossing. And this lets in some more light. As you can see, there's windows all around that. And then we have a detail here of the ambulatory, the area to walk around the altar end, the apse end, and from there you can go into the radiating chapels. One thing I want you to notice is that the windows are relatively small in these very thick walls. We'd say that Romanesque is an architecture of walls. And you can see how very, very thick the wall is right here when you're looking at the window. Saint-Foy was a Christian girl who was martyred in 303 under the persecutions of Diocletian. And she refused to sacrifice to pagan altars, and they tried to put her to death by burning her. But as so often happens in these miracle stories, God intervenes, there's a miracle, and she is saved from this horrific death. Since they can't kill her by burning her, they decapitate her. They cut off her head, and that does kill her. However, it also means that her bones are available to become relics. Now, what is a relic? A relic are the remains of a holy person, or something that has touched or been associated with the holy person. Very frequently they are the bones, because bones last longer than other body parts. But there are also things like the tunic of the Virgin, for example, or the veil of the Virgin, the blood of Christ, earth from the Holy Land that presumably Christ or the other saints may have walked on. Sometimes you have relics that are something that has been put close to the body, and they're secondary relics. In this case, they have some of the bones that are supposed to be Saint-Foy, and I understand that there are pieces of the skull inside this reliquary. A reliquary is the container for relics. It's very important to have a relic. And have many relics. You may remember that Saint Sernin had over 100, I think it was 128, was that it, relics. Santiago, of course, has that very important relic of the body of Saint James. And people venerated them. These you could kind of think of them as sacred souvenirs in a way, something that the person who is honored has left behind when they've soul has gone to heaven. And it was believed that the virtue of the person remains, in part attached to these relics, so they could get, in a sense, close to the saint. So you're not only honoring the saint by venerating the relics, but also people usually go to ask for something. Very frequently, they would like miracles, miracles of healing particularly. And of course, there are saints that specialize in various things. This particular saint was known for freeing prisoners, and also for healing miracles, and even perhaps bringing animals back to life. Now, how did they get her relics? Well, the relics were owned by another monastery. And so her relics came to Conques by means of what is sometimes called holy theft. First, they negotiated to get some kind of relics for their monastery. And you think it's really important to have relics and to have miracle-working relics because more people will come. And in many cases, most of the revenue, or a large amount of the revenue for the monastery does come from the donations of pilgrims. And also, they want to be known for having the virtue of this saint amongst them. it is a focus for their devotions as well. So when other monasteries weren't willing to give up their relics, they decided to take one. And so the monk came and pretended to be a faithful monk of the other monastery, and for years, until he was able to get close enough to the relic to steal it and bring it back to Conques. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, what? Monks are stealing? That's against one of the commandments. Thou shalt not steal. Well, they did have several ways of justifying holy theft. And the basic one was saying the saint willed it. And this was known because the saint, who could perform miracles, would never have allowed her body to be taken if she didn't want it to be taken, if she didn't want to move to this other monastery. So it just shows the will of the saint. Oftentimes, a monk would dream that the saint appeared to him and said, I want my body to be in your monastery. And so, essentially they're getting permission from the saint. Obviously, Saint-Foy is honored by having this beautiful golden reliquary. And this is one of the largest and most elaborate reliquaries of the Romanesque period. It is about 3 feet tall. And it is a full body reliquary. Of course, there's a lot of different kinds of reliquaries. Some of them are shaped what they call a burse, like a purse. Some of them, many of them, are shaped like a house or a little church, a chaise, they call those. Sometimes reliquaries are in the shape of the body part that the monastery owns. So if you have, for example, a piece of the foot of someone, you might have a foot reliquary, or a piece of the finger, you might have the hand reliquary. In this case, we've got a whole body reliquary, and it is a work of sculpture in its own. It is gold that is placed over the wooden core. And as you can see, she's just completely covered with gemstones. Now, there have been continual additions to this over the centuries. So what you're looking at is not necessarily the 12th century state. There are some additions to it. But let's look at a little detail so we can see some things. The head is actually supposed to be a Roman helmet on which they built up this sculpture of the head. And then you have many, many gemstones. And you can see here that there is what looks like a little door with a kind of rounded cross shape in the middle. Sometimes what they would do is have a window, as it were, so that you could look in and see the relic. Have the little piece of bone, for example, behind rock crystal or glass. And then even though you're close to the relic, but you might want to take a glimpse at it. So they sometimes will have these little windows. I should tell you that those round crystal orbs are later. They are from the 14th century. And here we have a detail where you can look at this and you can see these different gemstones and how they are placed all over the figure of Saint-Foy. You might notice that some of them are cameos, and there may even be classical cameos here. That is one way that the classical cameos survived. These are the gemstones that are cut with the pictures in them. You can see the busts here. When these cameos were reused in reliquaries or crosses or other liturgical implements, they had a much better chance of surviving because it's less likely that they get old-fashioned or thrown out. They become part of the precious materials that have been given to the saint. You might also notice that there are no faceted gems for the most part here. Any faceted gems would be from a later period. But they are highly polished. And then the mounts would raise them up so that they could catch the light. So you have the light coming off the reliquary, which is gold, and you have the light coming off of the different colored jewels. I am not an expert in gemstones by any means. I one time asked one of the professors, the former metalsmith at our university, when did they start faceting stones? And he thought it was around the 13th century. But most of these medieval gemstones that you'll see are highly polished and then raised up to catch the light. So I'm not sure when it started, but later than this. I should also tell you that those little round discs that are on the knees, those are later. The feet are later. The hands, I think, are 16th century. I think they're silver. So additional parts sometimes get added, sometimes replacing older parts, sometimes new. And it's the devotion continues, essentially. Okay, let's look at the architecture of the church. Like these Romanesque churches, these are just these massive, heavy walls. We're looking at the west facade. And as you can see, there's lots of walls and relatively small windows piercing that wall. You have these very tall buttresses of the tower that reach up and have the towers on top. And then we have the entranceway. And this entranceway has two doors within one portal, one arched and gabled portal with a very famous tympanum. This tympanum is discussed in the guidebooks and the stories of going down the pilgrimage road and seeing this work of art. So let's take a look at it. This is the very famous Last Judgment tympana at Saint-Pierre at Conques. I did want to say one other thing about relics. Students often ask me whether these are real relics or not. And I think by what they mean by real is, did the bones or the other items really come from the holy person? I could say, well, how would I know? But I think what I'll say is, well, it depends. As for Saint-Pierre, I have no idea. In the case of some medieval saints who were recognized as saints during their lifetimes, relics were collected immediately after their death. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Thomas Becket. And you know about the story of St. Thomas Becket, that he was murdered in the cathedral at Canterbury. And so his body was buried there and became a focus for pilgrims to come to Canterbury, particularly well known because, of course, of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So that would have undoubtedly been the true body of St. Thomas Becket. That would have been despoiled under Henry VIII. And I'll tell you about one saint that I'm pretty certain has to be his actual bones. If you go to Assisi, you can go down into there's an upper church and a lower church, and then there's a crypt, and or even lower level, and you can go down into that lower level. And, I've been to Assisi twice. The first time I was there was in 1970. And you would go down and there was a wall. And they would tell you that St. Francis was buried behind that wall. And they had the records. And then they excavated. And the next time I was there was in 1997, I think it was. And they had a room where they had carved away the wall, the rock, and up on this very sort of rocky, huge pedestal, so it was over your head, they had a wooden coffin with the bones of the saint. And you couldn't really look down at them to see them because it was way up high, but they had the lid open. So essentially his virtue, could come out and waved over you, and you could pray there in the presence of the bones of St. Francis. I have absolutely no reason to think that those are not the bones of St. Francis. They excavated where they believed he had been buried and uncovered them. On the other hand, it is highly unlikely that all of the relics are truly belong to whoever they said they belonged to. For example, during the Middle Ages, they had 3 skulls of John the Baptist. And there's this interesting story about the pilgrim who was venerated one of those skulls, and then he comes to another church and they say, well, we have the skull of John the Baptist. And he said, wait a minute, I just saw it in that other church. And they said, oh, well, they have the adult head of John the Baptist, but we have his head when he was 13 years old. Imagine that. How did they justify that? Obviously, it wasn't by logic, it was by miracle. It was said, and by some people believed, that the saints, if they wanted to, could multiply their relics. It's a miracle. The saint wants to be venerated in several places, so they can just, multiply their bones or whatever. And then my other thought, and this is something just to think about, does it matter? And on what level does it matter whether the bones are truly those of the saint? Now, I think the medieval people coming for a miracle would say, yes, it does matter, because if it's not the saint, maybe I won't get my miracle. But if they believe, is the saint going to be so nasty as to say, well, that's not really my bones, so I'm not going to give you any miracles? I don't know. Depends on the saint, I guess. And so, one of our questions is, does it really matter if the relics came from the saint? Is it enough to be the focus of devotion, and let's say true devotion, as long as it is efficacious? And efficacious is a word that is sometimes used in terms of an efficacious sacrament or an efficacious relic in this case. And basically, efficacious means it works. So if a person prays for strength or for healing or for whatever they're asking for, and the saint or somebody else today, I say, well, the universe, whatever, but anyway, whether you're a believer or not, they believed that the saint worked the miracle. If the saint obliged, does it really matter whether the relic is actually the bone of that particular saint? So I will leave you with that thought, and people will have all different answers to that, but it is really a very important part of medieval culture, and still today. People go down that pilgrimage road and pay homage to St. James. Sometimes they may be doing it in the sense of, I want to do what the medieval pilgrims did. In other cases, they may be going because of their focus on the devotion to the saint. But many places still have their relics, and they are often believed to still be efficacious. So now we want to look at the last judgment tympana at Saint-Pierre at Conques. One of the things I want you to do is imagine that you are a pilgrim and you have arrived here and you are going into the church and you are passing under this tympana. Now, one of the things that would be different would be this would be brightly painted. And in some of the details that I found, in fact, you can see just a little bit here, some of the paint shows. Now, I don't know that that's original paint. I have trouble believing that it would have lasted all the way from the 12th century. So it may have been repainted in subsequent years, but you will see when we look at some of the details, they'll show you some remains of some paint anyway. But it would have been brightly painted. And that would have meant that it would be easier to pick out and to see some of the details than when we have it sort of all, a stone color. But imagine that you are a pilgrim and you are passing under this last judgment. Look up. I'm certain you would. You would look up, and people would probably start pointing out things. Often people today, they go and they point out to all the torments that the devils are inflicting on the damned. That seems to attract a lot of attention in a lot of different works of art. But when you go under that, you are reminded that, and here I'm going to speak from a medieval perspective, that they do believe that Christ will come again and judge the living and the dead. That's from the Creed. But that they will face a judgment. They believe that they will face a judgment. And so this reminds you of that as you enter the church. If you were feeling crabby because your feet hurt, or frivolous in some way, it should focus your mind on the fact that you're entering the church. It's a sacred place, and what you're really doing for a pilgrimage is penitence to help you get into heaven. Most of that stuff we should be looking at this tympana rather than the other one, I think. There we're taking Cloister, and here we're doing the details. We don't know the exact date of this tympana. It's usually given a date somewhere around the first half of the 12th century. You can see I put several dates up. I put circa 1130 to 40 with a question mark after it. That is the date that Hearn uses in his book on Romanesque sculpture. And there was a more recent article from 1984 in the Art Bulletin by Don Denny that says that this tempo was actually created later, around 1150, so the mid-12th century. And, looking at that and comparing the style to other things, I think he has a point. If I think about other tympana that were created, say, around 1130, this is more natural in style. And it makes sense that it could be the later date. But, on an exam, I would accept either one. Or I'd only give you one choice or something like that. The Last Judgment was a frequent theme for Romanesque and Gothic tympana. And as we said, when people walk beneath the massive sculpture, they would be reminded of their eternal fate. Are they going to heaven? Or are they going to hell? So it's a functional work. It's not just made to be a work of art, to go in a museum. It's a work of art that's supposed to change your life. It's supposed to remind you of why you are on that pilgrimage for penitence and to help you get into heaven. Let's look at the image overall, and then I'm going to show you details so that you can see things better. As you can see, there are two levels with this band with inscriptions going across. And on the top level, in the center, is Christ in a mandorla. And he is the largest, most important figure. On Christ's right are the blessed. Now, there are several names that we use for the people who are going to heaven. Sometimes they are called the blessed or the elect. I guess you say these are the good guys. And they are on Christ's right because the right hand is considered to be the good hand, the best hand. If you're seated on the right, Christ is seated on the right side of God the Father, some people say. The right is always the best side. The left side, remember the left hand was the sinister hand, the sinestro hand. And so that's the bad side. And that is where the devils are and the people who are damned. At the top level, just to Christ's right, and it's our left. We have to remember that. We're looking at this, we're seeing it from the opposite side, but it's Christ's right, our left, are saints. And we'll take a closer look at those. The other side, there are devils and the tormented people. Down below, we're going to take a closer look to the group in the center, directly below Christ. We're going to see the weighing of the souls, the blessed entering into heaven, the damned being thrust into hell. And then we see on both sides this structure of bands of stone that form low gables. And on our left, Christ's right, we see these arches under the gables with figures under them. Now, those arches remind me of Christ's words that in my house there are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. It's a little architectural structure. In the center is Abraham, and on either side are, some people have identified them as prophets, but more of the people who are going to heaven, the blessed. On the other side, there's a large devil who presumably is Satan. He's the biggest one. And people being tormented with all of these devils. And as I said, we'll look closer at them. Up above Christ, it seems almost like he's sitting in front of it, extending up above his head, is the top part of cross. And you can see there are these little angels flying down in front of them. And they seem to be holding the cross. And as I look here, you know what I think those angels are holding? I think they're holding, one of them looks like he's holding a nail. And the other one looks to me like he's holding a lance. So these would be what we call the instruments of the passion. Some of the things that were used to torture Christ and torment Christ as he is dying on the cross. The nails that nailed him to the cross, the crown of thorns, the lance of Longinus that pierced Christ's side. The Bible just says centurion. The name has been added later. But here you see the angels flying in and holding the cross. Now, that cross reminds us that Christ is not only the judge of mankind, but he is the savior of mankind. According to Christian theology, when Christ sacrificed himself by dying on the cross, that sacrifice could atone for the sins of all mankind. But you had to do something about it. And here you see in this little kind of curving triangle space left as the arch slopes down, we have one of the angels blowing the last trumpet, other angels holding banners. So once again, fitting in the shape of the architecture. And let's look a little closer at Christ and the figures there. There is Christ, and you can see that one hand is up and the other hand is down. It's the right hand that is up and the left hand that is down. And that's because the right hand is for the people who are going to heaven, going up, as it were, and the left hand is pointing the direction, condemning those to hell. And as you can see, lots of little angels and devils there. Okay, we're also going to look at Christ a little closer. He is the largest figure. And we often talk about medieval hierarchies. All of medieval society, whether the church or the secular world, was arranged in hierarchies. And of course, God would be the most important figure of all. In this case, it is Christ. He is enthroned in heaven. He's wearing a crown. He's the King of Kings. He is also the judge and the Savior. And he is the most important figure, and he is the largest, as well as being in this elevated area in the center on the top. I want to point out that in this view, which is taken from below, you can see how the legs project out, how much more three-dimensional and solid that this figure is than, say, the sculpture that we saw at Toulouse. And this is certainly one indication that these statues were created at a later time, because you'll notice that Romanesque sculpture starts out being very abstract and stylized and becomes more natural and becomes Gothic, which is a more natural style. So that is undoubtedly one reason that we might think that this is more 1150 than, say, 1130. Now, the pose is reminiscent, is a little bit different because of the hand being raised not to bless, but just up to indicate which way the good people are going, and down to indicate which way the bad people are going. But I want to compare it with what we've seen before, the Christ in Majesty from Toulouse, from the ambulatory reliefs. And remember, we talked about this being called the plaque style, being in very low relief. And as we said, this is a much higher relief where the feet, where the knees actually extend out. And the face looks much more realistic, as you can see. So there is, 30 to quite possibly 50, I use the 1150 years between them, and a lot of stylistic changes. But you can see that the iconography is very similar. Christ is seated in heaven. He has the mandorla, the body, the almond-shaped halo that goes around his entire body behind him. He is frontal. Some people say iconic. He is looking straight out at us. He's not going to be moved. And just as I say, very similar poses. You can also see that instead of the tetramorph, you have these little angels, but they're in the same place. So the arrangement is very, very similar, but the style has developed. Now, here we're looking at this row of saints. And the first saint on Christ's right is his mother, Mary, the Virgin Mary, or the Blessed Virgin Mary. And it is traditional in Last Judgments that Mary is on the right side of Christ. This becomes, and when I say right, I know it's our left, it's Christ's right, but Mary is the most important saint of all. And you remember that Mary was considered to be the Queen of Heaven. She gave birth to the Savior. Without her, Christ could not have incarnated. And according to Christian theology, mankind could never have been saved because mankind was not good enough no human being was good enough to save themselves. They weren't worthy to get into heaven, only because Christ sacrificed himself to make up for the sins, to atone or to expiate the sins of mankind. Is anybody allowed into heaven? And of course, Mary is very important for that. So she's the very first one. Behind her is Saint Peter, and he's easily recognizable because he's got these great big keys. And he's also dressed in liturgical garments. He's the Bishop of Rome. And then behind him is Christ's cousin, John the Baptist, the prophet, who prophesies the importance of Christ. Behold, the Lamb of God. And that, of course, becomes part of the liturgy. The Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Have mercy on me. And then a group of other saints, some of which they've tried to identify. One of the figures who seems to be holding a scepter and wearing a crown is considered to be Charlemagne. And there is a Charlemagne connection with Conques as well. And here we're seeing a little closer. We see, once again, the Virgin Mary, St. John the Baptist, and who are the two chief intercessors with St. Peter between them. Now, I think this little detail is really interesting. The church is dedicated to Saint Foi, Saint Faith, and here we see Saint Foi bowing to the hand of God. And you can see she's just squished in here. That gable that we pointed out comes up, the line of stone, and then the figures above are on this other kind of ground line, another piece of stone. And she's just sort of wedged there in this little irregular triangle. And to fit her in, she's down on her knees, her head really against the ground, praying, showing homage. And then the hand of God is reaching out, and you see this curving line, so there's supposed to be clouds, to honor her or to welcome her to heaven. Behind her, you see a series of arches and an altar with a chalice on the altar. And Saint-Foi, from her name, reminds us of holy faith. And the attribute of faith often is to have faith in the sacrament. So there is certainly a reference to the Eucharist there, the altar with the chalice, having faith that this is the saving sacrament and the body and blood of Christ. Now, you can see those sort of curving things hanging down. Those are shackles. They're hanging above the altar. And they are referring to one of the specialties, if you will, of Saint-Foi, that she would release prisoners. And so these are votive offerings. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Lourdes or any other place that has a great pilgrimage site. But if someone is cured of an illness, very frequently they want to leave a votive offering. And, if you're a rich guy, this could be silver or something. If you're poor, it could be something like wax or wood. But they often will leave a little, for example, if you had a sore foot or a broken ankle or something like that, they might leave a little foot. If you were lame, they might leave a little leg. Or crutches. Some people, they don't need my crutches anymore, so I'll just leave them. And they hang those up around the altar with the relics as an indication of the people who have been cured by the saint. So these essentially are votive offerings. Oh, and I might just say a few words about rescuing prisoners. I know a lot of people will say, why would you want to release prisoners? Well, one of the reasons you want to release prisoners is because that is one of the 7 acts of mercy. You'll remember in the Bible, Christ tells about a parable of the Last Judgment, essentially. And he says that, there will be many people, who think they should be saved, yes, and he will welcome some of the people to heaven, and he'll say that you saw me thirsty, and you gave me drink. You saw me hungry, and you gave me food. You saw me naked, and you gave me clothes. And he goes on, there's 7 of them. And one of them is, you saw me in prison, and you rescued me. You released me. So it is one of the 7 acts of mercy. And then the other people who are being damned at the Last Judgment say, well, Lord, when did we ever see you in any of those conditions? And Jesus turns to them and says, as you did it to the least of these, you did it also to me. It doesn't matter what the condition of the person you're doing it to. You're doing it to Christ. And so that is why releasing prisoners is considered to be an act of mercy. You might even think today, there are people, even today with our system where supposedly you can offer evidence in both sides, that people have been condemned unjustly. And I would imagine, without forensic evidence or any court system that really allows someone to argue in their own defense or have a lawyer, that probably there were a lot more people who were condemned unjustly in the Middle Ages. So it might seem, a really important thing. You've been condemned and now you have been released by the intervention of the saint. Either you weren't guilty, or if you were, the saint knew that you were going to repent and could continue to do good things, I guess. Now we're going to look at the scenes that are just below Christ. And we see the weighing of the souls. And I look right here, it's almost in the middle, a little above the middle, where the 2 gables come down, and then the horizontal stone goes across. And right under there, you can see a angel and a devil, sort of kneeling there, looking at each other. We'll have a detail so you can see them even more clearly. And that is the moment of the weighing of the souls. And then down below, you see this sort of post in the middle, dividing heaven and hell, as it were. And you see several people headed toward an angel who is standing in a doorway, welcoming the blessed into heaven. And on the other side, you have this devil who's actually looking over at heaven. I mean, he's thinking, maybe, can I get any of those yet? I don't know. And some other devils are pushing someone right down the mouth of this monster. And we call this a hell mouth. There's this big monster mouth, and that is the entry into hell. You notice that there are some doors that right now are open, and presumably they're going to be locked with the big, strong iron going across them. It looks like a very strong lock there to lock people in heaven or hell. And here you see a little closer detail. You see that doorway going into heaven. Of the angel welcoming the blessed. A couple of figures which someone identified as prophetesses, but someone else in heaven. And then here we're seeing the weighing of the souls. Here is Saint Michael, and we know that because Saint Michael is the saint, the archangel, who weighs the souls of mankind in last judgment. And I think that there's been some losses here. We can see that there's no little figure of a human being, and parts of the scale are missing. But you can see the bottom parts of the scale, they're the curved sections. And Michael has his hand up to hold up the scale or the balance. And then here's the devil trying to get more people to go to hell, and he's cheating. He's got his finger on that balance, is trying to hold it down. And then here we see the elect or the blessed in heaven. And in the center, you have Abraham, the story that is told in the Gospel of Nicodemus, which is an apocryphal gospel, but as we mentioned during Byzantine art, had found its way into the belief of medieval Christians, was the idea that Christ, when his body was 3 days in the tomb, his soul went to limbo, the outer reaches of hell, and rescued the just of the Old Testament, people like Abraham. And so Abraham is in heaven. And you may have heard the phrase, to rest in the bosom of Abraham, which has become a kind of allegorical way of saying, come to heaven. And so we have these two little figures here who are, I won't say they're being hugged by Abraham, but they're very, very close to Abraham. Other figures, some of whom have been identified as prophets, prophetesses, but other figures in heaven at any rate. You might notice that devil is beating the people into hell. They're not really going willingly. We mentioned this idea of the hell mouth. And so I thought it would be interesting to show you the same subject in a different medium, dating about the same time as the carving at Conques. This is the Windsor Psalter, and it is an English manuscript, but shares some of that iconography, because here you have the damned in hell, and the angel is locking the door. And hell is shown as this great monster mouth with all of the damned in between. And of course, you see that same kind of iconography at Conques and at other places. And here we want to look at the devils and the torments in hell. We have this monstrous figure who is in the center, the largest of the devils, and this is presumably Satan, with the devils doing his bidding, and either allegorical figures of sin or sinners beside him, around him. And you can see they're tormenting people. Here it looks like someone off in your lower left of this image. It looks like he's in chain mail, and the devils are pulling him down and prodding him. You'll also see that next to Satan, on Satan's sinister side, there is a man who is hanged. And there's a kind of serpent wrapped around his lower limbs. And there's a big sort of round thing, which I think is supposed to be a money bags. It could be a weight to make it more suffering, but I think that may be what it is. And I'm going to make a suggestion. I mean, it could be, some other kind of person, but I think that is supposed to be Judas. And Judas is being hanged with his money bag that contains the 30 pieces of silver for which he betrayed Christ. And as you may remember from the gospel, Judas then is struck with remorse, and he goes and hangs himself. He commits suicide when he realizes that Christ is going to be put to death. So it seems to me that, as Judas is considered to be the arch sinner, the most horrible sinner that ever lived, because he betrayed Christ, who was his friend. And it seems to me that he would be given a prominence, and that probably is what the figure is. And here we see various torments of hell, devils doing cruel things to people. Roasting them in fires, pulling out their tongues. Now we want to go to Moissac. And this is the church and monastery of Saint-Pierre. Saint-Pierre is pretty close to Toulouse. It's not the same pilgrimage road, but it is close to Toulouse, about 40 miles away. And that will be significant because we do think that some of the sculptors worked both at Toulouse and at Moissac. The monastery suffered a lot of deprivations and was destroyed several times. And then it was rebuilt in the 11th century as a Cluniac monastery. This was one of the Cluniac takeovers, but this was a more favorable takeover. And it did bring this church to prominence. It became well-known, powerful under Cluniac rule. The church was consecrated in 1063, so this is actually a bit earlier than the other churches that we have seen. And you'll see it's not nearly as elaborate. As you can see, it is not cruciform. It does not have a transept. It is not very elaborate. It has no side aisles. It's just basically a nave that goes down, and then you have the altar at the end. And parts of this, you can see the different shading. Some of them are lighter and darker gray. The darker areas are the earlier areas, and the lighter areas are the later areas. So you can also see something that's kind of interesting is this large portal is actually on the south side. You can see the heavy buttresses and a tower. And I found this aerial view, and you can see the cloister. So you're looking down, you can see that there's, no transepts. It's just this long nave. There is an entrance at the west, and this you can't see it, but a more elaborate entrance on the south side, and then the cloister area. Now, there's two sets of sculpture, essentially, two different styles, and there are two sculptural workshops at Moissac. The earlier one, I'll show you a detail, we'll look at more of them, are the cloister piers. And these were created around 1100. And we'll take a closer look at those. And then there are totally different style at the south tympana and the portal, the sides of walls beside the portal. And this dates a little bit later, about 1115 to 1130. And I just put in a detail from that. As I said, we'll look at this shortly. Okay, so now we're looking at the columns that surround the cloister. The cloister, of course, is the open area, and then you have a covered walkway around that. And you'll see there are these heavy piers, these rectangular, heavy, large structures that hold up the arches. And then there are columns. And on those wider piers, and they're only about 21 inches wide, so they're not terribly huge, but they're wider than columns. On those piers are marble reliefs of 9 of the apostles and of the abbot Durandus, or Durand. Now, Durand de Brendens. We said that the church was rebuilt in the 11th century as a Cluniac monastery, and its first Cluniac abbot was Durand de Brendes. That's Berdens, but he's usually called Abbot Durandus because that is what the inscription has on his effigy here. Obviously, they're just taking his name Durand and adding the U.S. to make it Latin. He became the abbot in around 1047 or 1048. I found both dates. The church was consecrated in 1060, and the cloister was finished about 1100. So this gives us the date for the piers. Also, you'll see stylistically it fits quite well. Under Abbot Durand, or Durandus, the monastery becomes wealthy and influential. It has a noted scriptorium with scribes and illuminators. Today, of course, it is known for its Romanesque sculptural programs from the 12th century. There's also carving on the limestone capitals of the cloister columns. But I'm not going to show you details of those. I do want to point out that those are limestone. And the marble slabs cover the piers of the cloister, and that is probably significant. Here we have Abbot Durandus, and then on other piers there are the apostles, only 9 of them. They all are beneath an arch that frames them. And you'll notice that this is a very shallow relief, and the style hopefully reminds you of the plaque style from Toulouse. So it is believed that these were carved by Gueldin and or his workshop. I'm certain there's workshop there. As we take a closer look at this, I think of the pictures that I've seen, and I have not been there, but at the pictures I've seen, the Durandus sculpture, the Durandus leaf, is the highest quality. I have not seen pictures of all of them. You're going to see the pictures that I found in just a few moments. What we think is that Gueldin and his workshop were working first at Toulouse. And, maybe they finished about the time of the consecration or just before it, say 1096. And then they come over to Moissac, where they are working on or just finished the cloister, and they have been called to create the sculpture that decorates the cloister. These reliefs at Moissac are flatter than the reliefs at Toulouse. And there's a reason for that. The marble is in very thin slabs, only about 2 inches thick. And underneath the marble is brick. So it's sort of all filled up with brick, and then has this marble that you can see. What they think is that they found some antique sarcophagus, late Roman sarcophagi, and whether they maybe chiseled away any decoration, or maybe they didn't even have decoration, and they are putting those upended and using those as the slabs of marble on which to carve their reliefs. So that is one reason why they are so flat. It's just the material is very shallow. Now, we said that there are apostles, and then there is the image of the Abbot Durandus, and we know who he is, not just because he's wearing, an abbot's garments, but also because there is an inscription going around the archway that identifies him. Now, is it just because, our abbot's so great, we're just going to put him in the Cloister along with the apostles. Probably it has to do with the Cluniac view of the importance of the abbot. You've probably heard that the Christian church today regards bishops as the successor of the apostles. That's how the Pope claims his authority. He says, he is by apostolic successor, the successor to Peter, the first pope. Well, the Cluniac view was that the abbots were also the successors to the apostles, that apostolic authority was passed down to the high churchmen who, abbots were incredibly important during the 12th century, the 11th too. And the Cluniac order viewed monasticism as the heir to the apostolic vocation. So if you were a monk, you were following in the footsteps of the apostles. Stylistically, you'll notice that our abbot here is flattened. We've said that already. But he's very frontal. In other words, he looks straight out at us. He's going to be a kind of iconic figure, extremely symmetrical, and very stylized. You wouldn't look at this and then go out and see the abbot walking around. Of course, he's presumably dead when they did this, but since he died in 1072. You couldn't recognize him on the street from this picture. The idea of portrait likeness is not yet part of the artistic world. They certainly had that idea in ancient Rome, but not during much of the Middle Ages. It's near the later Middle Ages, in the 14th and, of course, in the 15th century especially. We're not talking about the physical likeness so much as the idea or even the ideal of an abbot. And in this case, the idea of a saintly abbot. You can see that he is given a halo, which we know denotes sanctity. He's blessing. The gesture with the two fingers up is a blessing gesture, and he could be making the sign of the cross with that. Of course, we don't have moving pictures. In his other hand, he holds a crozier, which is the pastoral staff. It resembles a shepherd's crook. Some of them get to be extremely elaborately decorated. And the idea that he is the pastor to his flock, in this case, his flock of monks. So he is like the good shepherd who cares for his sheep. Stylistically, we can see these parallel lines and ridges as drapery folds, and then he's carved out a design of lozenges or diamond shapes with little circles at the points, and this pattern is repeated as though it was the edging of the liturgical garment. So this could be representing something like embroidery or jewels. As regular as it, I'm probably thinking more embroidery. This particular relief is, I think, probably the finest of the reliefs, at least of the ones I have seen. It could very well be by Geldwin's hand. Other work might be by his workshop. And we say that, basically, they could be by designs that he drew and then left for other members of his workshop to create. And here are 4. I don't have pictures of all 9 of them, but here are 4 of these saints, apostles, St. Bartholomew, Peter, Matthew, and Simon. And as you can see, they're all underneath their arches. They're sort of compressed into the space. They're very shallow reliefs. And there's just a little bit of variety in the stance, but a lot of similarity, and certainly the way the drapery folds are shown with these sort of double ridges that create the folds. And I'm sure that will remind you, let's look a little closer. Here we see St. John, and you'll notice that he seems to be standing on a staircase with his feet sort of dangling down. You might also notice the heavy jaw and the gesture of the arms, which may remind you of something. Here we have one of the angels from Toulouse, and I'm showing him with some of the cloister reliefs. And as you can see, they are similar in pose. and also those heavy jaws and the way the feet dangles down a little. The quality doesn't seem to be quite as high. Part of that is just because of condition. The statues at Moissac had been out in the weather for centuries, while the ones in Toulouse have been inside and protected. But also, I suspect this is workshop, maybe than the master's hand. Now, when I saw those feet, I immediately thought of something else, and that was a work that you're familiar with from Byzantine art. And it is, of course, this plaque with St. Michael the Archangel standing underneath an arch, only he sort of projects out at the top. And then you have the steps, and the feet are not exactly fitting the steps. They seem to dangle down a little bit, which was, this sort of very classical drapery in the Michael ivory. That's from the 6th century. Now, I'm not going to tell you, because I don't think it's probably true, that Gildin actually saw this particular ivory. I've been trying to find out if they know where it was in earlier times, but I have not found that. But certainly we said that the plaque style was probably derived from things like ivory or metal plaques that might have been used as book covers or diptychs or something. And so we do know that some of the Western medieval book ivories, some of the earlier ones, for example, some of the Ottonian ones may have even been created by Byzantine artists who come to the West or send their works to the West. And then artists copy them. And so he may have seen something like this, maybe not as classical and beautiful, but something else with the motif of the feet dangling down over the stairs. And so here we have them. As you can see, here's the lower left is the feet of St. Michael. Right above them, those feet of St. John, much, more stylized and certainly more weathered. And then here we have the feet of St. Peter. And you'll notice that Peter is wearing sandals, just like St. Michael, slightly different design. And I also found a Carolingian ivory. This is the Lorsch Gospel cover, and I just took the detail of St. John the Baptist from that. And as you can see, St. Peter's feet and his sandals bear a resemblance to this Carolingian ivory. So to me, it sort of confirms the idea that the plaque style comes from studying and enlarging designs that may have originally been created in ivory work.